Part 8.2 Overview of JavaScript. This is our first video about JavaScript. So let us look at some basic information of JavaScript. First, brief history of JavaScript. Here, let me just use some simple timeline to describe some relatively big events related to JavaScript technology. So let us start from the very beginning. The first important event, Mosaic web browser. There is a very old web browser called Mosaic. So that is the first browser with graphical user interface. So there was another one not using graphical user, just a text. Not look very good, but it can, help you look at some text-based information. But this one, graphical user interface, the first one, in 1993. So it is an important invention for web browser. Then 1994, Netscape. Netscape Navigator. So it is a very important web browser. 1994, this browser quickly replaced the Mosaic. Because you can see colors, beautiful colors, a lot of fancy features, looks much better than the old Mosaic one. The color not very good. The features, functionality, pretty in low level. So people quickly adopt Netscape Navigator. So it occupied the market, web browser market, dominant web browser market, 90-something% of the market share. Then in 1995, the browser creator, so those people, they want to add a scripting language because they want to do dynamic features. Using scripting language, people want to add dynamic features. But how to create that scripting language? So that's an important issue. So at that time, they look at these two languages, Java and Scheme. Java, at that time, 1995, Java was just created. Early years, Java was created at that time. But it quickly, it became very popular, because it was very powerful, and it was designed for internet. The biggest reason Java was so hot at that time because it was built for the internet. So definitely, when the Netscape team, when they need to create a new scripting language, so they look at the Java first. They want to borrow some features from Java. Another language not very popular, well-known, Scheme, so they want to look at that one. All right, so then a new scripting language created with syntax similar to Java. Syntax similar to Java. All right. After that, they need to give a name to this new scripting language. The first one they called Mocha. I think it was a natural extension from the Java name, right? The Java, that's the coffee. So from the coffee Java, then it go another step forward, Mocha. But later, people want to be more serious. So they changed the name quickly to LiveScript. Yeah. More serious name. Yeah, not kidding. Yeah, serious name. All right. Then after 3 months, another name, so they feel better than the LiveScript. They call it JavaScript. JavaScript. The biggest change, they added Java to their scripting language name. Yeah. This change was big. Yeah, was big. Yeah. It helped promote this new scripting language. Yeah. So many people thought it was a marketing ploy. No. So many, because the result was so good, so many people believe the name change mainly for the marketing purpose. Yeah. Yeah. Could be, but another reason, the syntax similar to Java, right? Yeah. Pretty, many the ways to write the JavaScript statements very close to the Java way. Yeah. All right. After that, so let us look at the story after that. In 1995, Microsoft made that Internet Explorer to compete against Netscape Navigator. Yeah. Because, Microsoft, they dominate the Windows operating system market. So they use that operating system dominant power to, using that monopoly to squeeze the market share of the Netscape Navigator. So eventually kick the Netscape Navigator out of the market. Yeah. So that big. The influence is that big. Yeah. Although they went to the court, tried to, but eventually Netscape Navigator was gone. They cannot survive in the Microsoft Windows environment. Yeah. All right. So then Microsoft, they want to add their version. Yeah. So because they don't want to use the current JavaScript version. So they, the similar way, they don't want to use Netscape Navigator. So they create their own web browser, Internet Explorer, then kick out Netscape Navigator. So they just take the same approach. They want to create their own version of JavaScript, still try to kick out the old JavaScript. So they changed the name to JScript. Very similar to the JavaScript, but they, syntax modify a lot of places. So they call it JScript. Yeah. But it was not very successful. It was not. Yeah. So not many people use that, JScript. Yeah. JScript. They cannot compete with JavaScript. Yeah. And then later, another technology community, so Europe, here you see the Europe, technology community, they make new standard for the web browser scripting language. So they call the name ECMA script. Yeah. The name is very hard to memorize. Not as good as JavaScript, right? Everybody can memorize JavaScript name easily, but this one, not many people can memorize. So, people still like to use the JavaScript. All right, it's JavaScript. Yeah. So then the story after that, the JavaScript becomes more and more important. Yeah. Another important web browser, Mozilla Firefox, in 2004. So this one actually derived from Netscape Navigator. You know, the same team, so they use their old technology, so they can borrow from the Netscape Navigator technology. Then they develop new web browser, call it Mozilla Firefox, and it was very successful. Yeah, it got a lot of market share, significant market share in the web browser market. Yeah. All right. The next big event in 2005, Ajax technology was created. Ajax. Okay. In the Ajax technology, several technologies putting together. This J refers to JavaScript. Yeah. Several existing technologies putting together so you can get data directly from the server. You can do direct communication with server. So it is simple. So this is a simple technology, but very powerful, very useful. Yeah. So if we have chance, we may learn some simple examples. Ajax example. Yeah. So that was a big event. All right. So then the last one in 2008, Google Chrome. Yeah. The current dominant web browser was created, and they use JavaScript a lot. Yeah. So they also, use JavaScript a lot. So the current web technology at the client side, JavaScript is extremely important. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So that's our, history part, brief history part. Next, overview of JavaScript. So let's look at some simple properties. 3 parts of JavaScript: core, client side, server side. The core part, yeah. So that part can be used both sides, client side and the server side. Yeah. But for the server side, currently the Node.js is the most significant player at the client side. Yeah. Other than that, yeah, so most people still use JavaScript at the client side. Yeah. So that is our main focus, client side here. Yeah. All right, next, properties of JavaScript. Yeah. First, JavaScript is a lightweight interpreted programming language. Lightweight. Yeah, so not heavyweight, lightweight. So when we write JavaScript code, usually the code is relatively short, relatively simple, relatively short. So lightweight. Yeah. All right. Interpreted, not compiled, interpreted. So you know its meaning. Yeah. So actually interpreted by a web browser or a browser. Yeah. So that's simple. Yeah. All right. JavaScript and Java are 2 different programming languages, completely different. Yeah. So why we say that, right? Because many people without basic web technology background, they tend to confuse these 2 different languages. They see Java, right? They see Java, so they feel they should be, even if not completely the same, but should be, very close, but actually not, completely different. Yeah. So we treat them as completely different programming languages. Yeah. All right. It is supported by all modern web browsers. Yeah, so that's the importance of this scripting language. Otherwise, if some web browser does not support JavaScript, it is useless. Nobody wants to use it. Yeah. Basically, you cannot do dynamic. Yeah. You cannot do dynamic content easily. Yeah. If you try to develop a different scripting language, but people may not like to use, like a Microsoft JavaScript, right? Microsoft JavaScript. So not many people like to use that. Even if it was created by Microsoft, still not many people like to use that. Yeah. All right. Next, probably the execution environment of JavaScript is a web browser. Yeah. So you write a code, then because your JavaScript code typically embedded inside HTML file. Yeah. All right. So after you put the JavaScript in HTML page, then you save it, then you refresh the web browser, or you double click, refresh. If it's already there, you refresh the page, then you see it works. Yeah. The web browser will, interpret all the statements inside your JavaScript code. Yeah. All right, next. You don't have to get or download JavaScript. Yeah. Because when we use a new computer programming language, typically we need to download it, right? Download it. Yeah. So the software, then we can write a code. But this one, you do not need to download it. The reason is simple. Everyone has web browser, right? Yeah. Have several web browsers. Yeah. You just use your web browsers as the execution environment for JavaScript. Yeah. All right, next. JavaScript is embedded in HTML documents. Yeah. Either two ways. Two-way, physically or logically. Yeah. Physically, yeah. So you can see the embedded code, right? Physically, logically, the JavaScript file could be an independent outside file, okay? Yeah, another place. Yeah. But your web page, you can connect. So you can, specify the location of your JavaScript file. Then inside the page, you can call your JavaScript functions. So two different ways you use JavaScript inside your HTML documents. Yeah. All right, next. JavaScript is not class-based, object-oriented program. Class-based, yeah? Yeah, so what's the class-based? You just use Java as example. Java, the class-based, right? Yeah, everything should be written inside Java classes. So class-based, object-oriented. JavaScript is not like that. Yeah, JavaScript, typically you write JavaScript functions. Yeah. But sometimes you may need to use JavaScript objects in JavaScript. So using those objects, then you can call the methods of those objects, that kind of object-oriented. You have certain portion of object-oriented content inside JavaScript. Yeah. But the typical way you write JavaScript functions. Yeah. All right. JavaScript can change HTML content. Yeah. How do we use JavaScript? Next, let us look at how do we use JavaScript. We have several ways we use JavaScript. Yeah. Typically, we control the content of the page. We can make part of the content dynamic. So we want to change the content. Yeah. Here, the first thing, JavaScript can change HTML content, its capability. Okay. The second, change attribute values. Yeah. HTML, you have many elements. Some of the elements, you have some certain attributes. Sometimes you like to change the values of the attributes. You can use JavaScript functions to do that. Okay. Yeah. Another case, you can change HTML styles, the CSS part. You can use JavaScript to change. Yeah. So in that way, you can change the styles of the content. Yeah. So you can see we can do so many things. Yeah. So that makes JavaScript very powerful. Yeah. All right. JavaScript can hide, show HTML elements. Sometimes you want to hide some of the elements. Sometimes you need to show, bring them up, so that could make your graphical user components change very flexible, very powerful. Yeah. All right. Yeah. The last one, the client-side JavaScript cannot replace server-side computing. Yeah. The reason I put this last property, just let you know, here we know JavaScript is very powerful, but we don't want to give people impression that we can use JavaScript to replace server-side programming. It's not that. Still, the server-side programming, that's the big part of web programming, big part. Yeah, even much bigger than the client-side part. Yeah. All right, so let us finish part 8.2 right here.